Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror films throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight we'll be celebrating the 60th anniversary of Jose Marins' groundbreaking 1964 film, At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul, which introduced us to the iconic character, Coffin Joe. Here's the trailer.
E é a vida. É o princípio da morte. O que é a morte? É o fim da vida. Ué, cadê a carne?
Hoje não sei, você esqueceu que é sexta-feira santa?
Hoje eu como carne, nem que seja carne de gente. Qual o valor da vida? Se não há um filho para a continuidade do sangue. A mulher que não concebe filho não precisa de cuidado. Você vai me fazer muito e muito feliz. Qual a razão para me temerem? Porque uso roupa preta? Porque eu creio em mim? Como um pedaço. Tá gostoso.
Hoje é dia santo, José. Aí eu vou
Toma!
comer carne.
Pegue o dinheiro do chão. Vamos!
Eu quero um filho! Leve a minha alma!
It's Coffin Joe's world, and we're all just living in it, celebrating 60 years of the Man in Black. And we've got an awesome panel to chat about it with us. Let's bring everybody in and let's say hello to Jonathan Lucas,
Hello.
Alan Trump,
Hello, and remember, blood is the only reality.
John Kitley,
Greetings.
Cullen Wade,
What's up, everybody? Just remember, eugenics has been disproven for decades now.
and Rigo Garay.
Hey, everyone.
And we're going to be chatting about At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul from 1964, as well as This Night, I'll Possess Your Corpse, 1967, and Embodiment of Evil, 2008. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. Rigo and Cullen and Jonathan, this is all your first times on the show. Thank you all for being in the mix. And Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to lead things off because you contributed the essay for At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul for our book, Hidden Horror. And I would love to ask, because the way the project worked was that I asked people to suggest titles that they felt weren't getting enough attention or ones that they wanted to highlight. And you picked At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. What drew you to this film?
Firstly, one of the big things was that I felt it fit the mission statement very well. I mean, not only is it a film that I felt was underknown and underappreciated, but it involves an entire horror icon who is also somewhat underknown and underappreciated, and an entire, I guess, cinematic universe that is somewhat underseen. So I felt that, very much fit the idea of hidden horror there. You know, the reason I chose it is because that film on its own is also just a really strange, unique movie. Like there's an almost traditional element to it, a setup to it, and yet then you have this figure of Coffin Joe, this delightfully deranged pervert who makes it all somewhat non-traditional and turns it all mean-spirited and blasphemous and all that fun stuff. So that's the appeal of it to me is it's very much in the character, and the director Jose Marins is in his own way also a delightfully deranged pervert. So yeah.
Well, thank you for
That's essentially what I like about it.
Yeah, I'm going to do just a quick circle around and just check in with everybody's origin stories. So, Jonathan, I'll come back to you and found out how you came to the film for the first time. Alan, how did Coffin Joe enter your world?
The first time I read about him was in that Phil Hardy's Encyclopedia of Horror Movies, because it had all of a wide variety of movies from all over the world, and it had that picture from the second film with Coffin Joe grabbing a guy with those fingernails. And then after that, something weird came out with them, Mike Rainey and his folks, and somebody got me a bootleg of their films. And then, I wound up getting the Phantoma DVDs in the little coffin box that they had with the little comic books that came with it. So,
I liked you brought props. That's good. John, how about you?
Kind of the same with Alan, something word video. I mean, if it wasn't for that company, it would have been decades before the cult world knew who Coffin Joe was. So Barney brought those over to the US and started marketing them here. And of course, as any diehard film fan, when you went, Coffin Joe, what? Who? What?
Yeah.
So you take that dive and just immediately go, this is like something I've never seen before. And it still holds up today.
Yeah. Cullen, how about you?
I think I have a very interesting origin story. Just growing up as a horror fan, a budding horror obsessive in the, like 90s, 2000s. It was just a name that I knew, like reading Fangoria, Rue Morgan stuff way back in the day. I think there were features on him, but like people have said, kind of difficult to get a hold of the movies. So for a long time, I just knew him as this figure. And the iconography, the top hat and the cloak and the fingernails, of course, just sort of had this like instinctual horror fan appeal to it. Knowing nothing about the movies, it was just sort of like we were talking about Freddy Krueger before the mics went hot. I think in a similar way, growing up, just like a figure that you knew, kind of an iconic boogeyman. And then I don't think I actually saw the films until adulthood, and not what I was expecting at all, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Was your reaction favorable or?
For the most part, yeah.
And Rigo, how about you?
Many years ago, I used to watch, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Cinemassacre, the James Rolfe's, and he would do this thing every October where each day he would review a new horror movie. And I discovered a lot of movies through that channel, actually, in those videos. But that's when I first heard of the Coffin Joe movie. So I went to the library and I found at Midnight I Take Your Soul. And then after, years later, when I started really getting into horror, I looked up the other movies. But I watched Embodiment of Evil fairly recently for the first time a couple months back. Again, it's kind of funny. I'm just like discovering more and more movies that this guy has done.
Yeah, well, that's the joy of being a fan, is that there's no bottom. And like you, John, I mean, I thought I was pretty well versed, and then suddenly it's like, wait, what do you mean there's this Brazilian horror film and this guy's done how many movies? And like you, Alan, I came by it via a bootleg. One of my friends, same person who introduced me to Jess Franco and a lot of the Italian guys, he slid one of those my way, and it sat on my shelf for a long time. And then I finally popped in, and it was like, what? Because it, on that grainy VHS, that black and white is so striking, and you're kind of leaning in to see what the hell is happening, but getting close to the TV feels kind of grimy and dirty. You're like, I don't want to hang out with this guy. That was my origin story. Jonathan, bouncing back to you, how did you come to the film for the first time?
To be honest, I can't remember. And it's probably not a particularly interesting tale. I was probably just, I think the name had always sort of been bobbing around out there in conversations with horror fans. And I just eventually got around to it one year as part of an October challenge. And it was kind of just one of those moments where it just clicked and was like, all right, I've got to see everything this guy's made now, don't I?
Yeah. Well, Jonathan and I know each other from the IMDb message boards, and the October Challenge is where I first learned of that, where it was like you had to watch 31 movies over the course of October, and 16 of them had to be first-time views. And I discovered, like you, a ton of movies that way, because you're hanging out with really versed horror fans. And so for them to be finding 16 new titles that were new to them, they were constantly just bringing up new titles for us to discover as well. Alan, would you like to take a stab at a brief introduction as to what At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul is about?
Well, it has, in this little Brazilian town, it has a Mexican undertaker gravedigger known to the folks as Zaidu Caixão, or Coffin Joe, as he's commonly known here. I actually had to look a little of the philosophy up, but he is a firm believer in the Friedrich Nietzsche concept of the Superman. God is dead. There is no God, and the only actual life is through perpetuation of your bloodline. So what he's looking for is he's trying to find a young lady to carry his child. Well, unfortunately, his wife has proven barren, or maybe Zai is barren. You never really know. So he decides that he has to dispose of her, and he turns his attention on various other people, including his best friend's fiance. Just about anybody who winds up in his path winds up being somehow destroyed. And at the very end, he does get his comeuppance with a huge phantasmagoric orgy of ghosts and things crawling out of the grave and rotting corpses. But is it all in his imagination, or is it real? And it does leave the door open potentially for a sequel, as we will get into.
A sequel that would eventually manifest, because At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul was hugely successful in Brazil. And it really did. I think that was Marin's point, was creating a boogeyman that was native to his country. He was a huge fan of classic monster movies, and would go on to host a horror host for TV. But yes, there's something about his huge theatrical presence that just dominates not only the characters in the movie, but he just dominates the movie. I was talking to Jonathan, off camera. The fact is that this is a genuine filmmaker. There's clear skill being displayed. And I love it when someone decides that they could make any movie they want, and they want to make this movie. And it's so transgressive, and it's so kind of off-putting, and it resonates with an audience. I mean, that's a true success. John Kitley, when you first encountered it, what was your general reaction to it? What was your response?
I was amazed, that he wasn't more well-known, which, I mean, you can understand from being very small in Brazil, and it's not going to get playing like local theaters over here. But I was amazed at the character, how blasphemous his character is in a country that is very religious, and the repercussions that could have happened. I mean, he got blacklisted, or so to speak. I mean, he was not a popular guy, and to the point where parents would tell their children that if you don't, go to bed, Coffin Joe's going to come get you. So, I mean, he became a real life boogeyman in that country. But what amazes me, and especially on my recent viewing of this, how well made it is. And it's not only Coffin Joe that's committed to the project, but the other actors. They're all in it, from having spiders on them and snakes, and they're all in it, and they're performing. And it's an original story. It's unbelievable how well crafted the film is, and how effective it still is to this day. It blows me away. It blew me away the first time I saw it, for the content and what he was doing, and that he is the most unlikable character ever. But we still are like, oh man, that Coffin Joe, look at him go.
Yeah, Cullen, we talked about the Freddy Krueger idea. There is something appealing about this character, even though he's the worst human being ever to walk the face of the earth.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting. We were having a conversation off mic as well about how as we have aged, we sort of don't really think he's that cool anymore. Sort of, cultural context has kind of shifted how we approach this character. There is a charm to him, but I have to wonder how much that charm is acculturated anti-hero acceptance. My wife and I talk all the time about this concept of the you love to hate him guy. Right. And I mean, to what extent that's sort of become a smokescreen that just ends up forgiving and ultimately encouraging just awful male behavior is, definitely something I think that needs to be unpacked with this movie. Watching it with 2024 eyes, there's a patheticness to this character. He never gets what he wants. You kind of get the impression he doesn't even know how or what to do with. I mean, he loves children, he venerates children, but I mean, could you see him being a dad? You know, like, could you see him dropping the kid off at school and like packing lunches? He has a very theoretical desire for offspring. I'm totally unconvinced he could carry it out, you know, especially, you know, with Laura in the second film not making it. But I mean, we'll get there eventually.
There's something about putting a character front and center like this, and he's the most charismatic person in the film. Even if the acts that he's committing are despicable, we're kind of forced to go along with him.
Captive audience.
Yeah, exactly. We're a captive audience. And when he's the most interesting person, similar to, you know, Freddy Krueger, you know, he's the most interesting character in his movies. And so therefore, we are drawn to him. We are going to follow them. Even if we have an idea as to whether we like this person or not, we're along for the ride and we're following him regardless.
Yeah, and the other thing about him, I think that is interesting in that regard, and sort of adds to a pathetic quality that I see in this character, is that he's a guy. Oh, and I said earlier that I was kind of surprised with what I saw when I finally got around to watching these movies. I had assumed because of his presentation, he's got this vampire look. I had assumed he would have something supernatural about him, some sort of power. He's just a dude who dresses like a vampire and creeps everybody out and just walks around being awful to everybody. And yeah, there's something so compelling about the groundedness of it when you're expecting, because like you said, he has this classic horror lineage. And, you know, obviously the director was a big fan of the, you know, the Universals and the, you know, and the Hammers and stuff, but he's just like a weirdo. He's just like local creep
Made good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll go there because it's interesting to see the parallels between what's happening in the world today, where we have somebody who commits crimes and nobody seems to be able to hold that person accountable. I can't help but watch these movies, but through that lens these days, I'm just like, why can't somebody stop him? And it's because nobody can stand up to him, and those that do stand up are vanquished.
And also I'd argue because of that acculturated forgiving the bad boy thing that I talked about before.
Yeah. Rigo, I'm curious to hear, you said you kind of came to these later. What was your kind of take on it when you did finally catch up with him?
When I watched the first one many years ago, I just didn't really watch movies critically or really thought about movies analytically. Rewatching it again, you know, it's funny. It left me sort of confused the same way I felt confused after watching Alucarda. I don't know what his views and talking about the filmmaker, but Jose, like his views or philosophies on organized religion. Like in this movie, he like denounces God and religion. And he thinks it's all hogwash, right? And he goes out of his way to eat meat during like Good Friday or something like that. You know, you're watching this thing and I'm thinking, okay, I guess Jose in real life probably shares the same beliefs in a way and probably thinks that. But at the end of the movie, I feel like he's sort of leaning towards, it was like sort of a cautionary tale where it's just like, okay, well, here's this guy who denounced God and religion so much. And then at the end of the movie, he gets fucked up. And I felt the same way about Alucarda, where it's just like, you know, this whole time that the religious people were the ones that like were shaming her for having a queer companion and like shaming her for believing in different things and blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, she like is actually the bad one. So it's just a little like, all I'm saying is like, do these filmmakers think like, that's what you get for not believing in?
There is certainly a morality tale quality to it. You know, the non-believer is punished for his non-belief. And so I think it is an interesting way for the filmmaker to kind of have it both ways, to, you know, have a voice against the church and against religion and against those that follow blindly, but also to be able to say, whatever my beliefs are, you know, I do believe that evil is punished, you know, and I do believe that wrong is not right. I think it's a really interesting struggle that's being portrayed. Jonathan, did you have something you want to add?
You know, it's worth noting that at the time in Brazil, there were some very strong blasphemy laws, and that he was essentially breaking with the movie. Things like publicly mocking somebody for having a religious belief was actually against the law and held a potential prison sentence, still does, as far as I know, in Brazil. So I think having that morality tale element is a way of potentially a way of circumventing, like getting around these actually really dangerous things that he was doing in such a religious country with such an authoritarian government at the time. It's quite a bold movie in many ways. Like, it took a lot of guts to do that in 1960s Brazil, I think.
Well, and it's the same thing that, other filmmakers would do in America to get around censorship. You'd have like these really, awful criminals and awful monsters and murderers. But as long as they met with justice at the end, it was okay.
A lot of the pre-code horror, like Murders of the Rue Morgue. I mean, you're talking about a theme with bestiality that got through the censors because he got what was coming from. So yeah, they did that all the time back then.
It reminds me a lot of what went on with the EC horror comics. Terrible things happen in them, but at the very end, evil is generally punished. I remember this when I watched the second movie, This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse Again. The ending of that reminded me a lot of from my high school days when we read Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. And he knows he's been damned and he's had this good life. And Faustus says something about Christ's blood flows through the firmament. One drop would save me. And in this one, he's saying, priest, give me a cross, the sign of the sun. And
yeah, we talk about like the theatricality of it, the broadness of the performance, the ghosts of his victims showing up at the end of both the first movie and the second movie. That is straight out of Richard III, his sins coming back to visit him. And it fits completely. I love the scenes of him just shouting to the heavens and defying God to take him out. He's just yelling, lies, it's all lies. And my poor wife said to put up with me yelling mentira, all week long, because it's so much fun to say.
My absolute favorite shot in all three of these movies is right near the beginning of the first one, where he's eating the lamb. He's eating the leg of lamb in front of the window while the procession goes by, and he's just laughing, eating his lamb. Yeah, I mean, these are not particularly subtle movies. And to Jonathan's point, skirting the censors stuff we were talking about, I think the ending of part 2 is just so overblown, right? With the music and the hymn, and there's scripture on the screen at the end, and it's like it's really nailing that point home that I think it feels a little like a parody to me. Like he's saying, all right, this is what y'all want. Here you go. You can't do anything. I said it's all bad. I said God is great, but I'm going to spend a lot more time on the spiders and the snakes.
First of all, this could all be in Coffin Joe's head. All the ghosts and the demon, everything that he's seeing could technically be his delusions, or it's not necessarily religious, but it's just the supernatural. So these ghosts that are coming back from a revenge, or the corpses rising, there's plenty of ways to take that, even if you take out still the religious element. I do think at the end he is playing the card of, I'm going to get what's coming to me just so I don't get hung outside the movie studio. He continued that blasphemous theme through all three films, including the last one, which is even more over the top. So his spouting, to God and to whoever, the constant, like, show me the power you have. I think that's the actor, the director. It is Coffin Joe. That is going to bleed throughout all the films.
As a person who was raised Catholic, he does so much off murder, rape, exposing people to poisonous snakes and serpents, going to their graves and stealing and drinking the offerings of wine that are on their graves. For me, I don't know of any Catholic, no matter how lapsed you are, who wouldn't be offended by the scene where he grabs the crown of thorns off of Christ's statue's head and jams it in the guy's face. Wow. Okay.
This kind of feels like a precursor to like a lot of slasher films, because he keeps coming up with he doesn't kill anybody the same way twice. Like he drowns them, he smashes them under rocks, he lights them on fire. Like he's all about the creative kills. And I see that is both the character and that's the director going, here's something maybe you haven't seen before. Here's something straight out of your nightmares.
It's interesting that again, he's just like a regular dude. You know what I mean? And you just think that he would be some sort of supernatural force or some sort of monster or something. And he's just a regular guy. So coming up with these kills, and it's wild. Also, just to quickly bring up, it's funny at the end of that, of At Midnight, with all the souls of the people coming back that he's murdered. It reminded me a lot of Maniac. Like, happening, guys, too, right? And also, that one segment in Creepshow, I forgot the name of it, where the one with Ted Danson.
Something to tide you over.
Yeah, something.
There we go. Yeah. Absolutely.
Hold my breath a long time.
Yeah.
Well, there's also, the culture of Brazil. I've visited there a few years back, and there is a strong sense of machismo. Men need to be real men. Like he says to the kid, real men don't cry. That attitude is pervasive. There is a lot of spousal abuse and things like that, where like men are expected to be dominant. That caricature that he's presenting is, also kind of part of the culture. We have a strong man who the reason he dominates is because he dominates. Because anybody who stands up to him, he shuts them down 2 times. That shot with the broken wine bottle into the guy's hand, that's going to quell any rebellion that might be coming up in the bar. But at the same time, like as an audience, you're going, if all of you would just stand up to him.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's who's going to be the first, who's going to be the one to step forward. The one guy who steps forward gets the crown of thorns in the face.
But it's also interesting that he is defiant towards everybody, but especially like you were saying towards women. But throughout the trilogy, he is consistently haunted by the women.
Yeah.
And yes, it's the ones that he's killed, but that his power over real life might be one thing, but he is definitely haunted by those that he has wronged, especially the women. So he is trying to be that machismo guy, but on the same token, his nightmares are haunted by these women.
I'll just say I really do wish we had some women on this panel. I think it's unfortunate that we can't get a woman's perspective on sort of the overall treatment of women in these films. But he does, in my memory, I remembered there being a lot more sexual assault in these movies. He really only rapes one person, and that's Teresina, right, in the first film. And she's the one who continues to haunt him throughout everything, and is his main sort of regret, I guess. But I do think that there's an element of, obviously, probably some wish fulfillment and some kind of, especially in the third film, that there are all these women, not going to shame anyone if they find Coffin Joe to be, like sexually appealing. That's you do you. But it's a little beggars belief a little bit that he would find all of these young, attractive women who are just like so into him. I forgot how much of the sex in these 3 movies actually is consensual. In a way, I feel like that almost makes it a little grosser.
It's the power.
Yeah.
Right? That's all. It's the power. And plus, if you go to the third one, he's got a reputation. He's known.
Yeah.
So
he's a cult leader
he is an iconic figure in the film series. So it is totally the abuse of power. People are attracted to him same way Manson and all the other nutcases out there. It's that power that they are attracted to.
In the first film, anyway, who is the one living person he's afraid of? The old witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she is the ultimate feminine, like she's not taking any of his shit. She's not scared of him. And that's the thing that terrifies him. As dominant as he can try to be, she's not having it. And I think her performance, she matches him in terms of that energy and that almost demonic quality. But yes, to your point, Colin, strangely enough, I didn't get a lot of women that signed up for this panel. I don't know what that says. I think also it's an opportunity for men to say, hey, we see this, we recognize it, and we don't think it's cool. As opposed to being like, fucking A, man, Coffin Joe's my hero.
Yeah, I was afraid that I'd be walking into some of that, and I'm glad I didn't. Just very briefly, just to address the old witch thing, I do think it's interesting, you know, the sort of crone archetype, the fact that she has power and she is the one female figure who is not sexually viable because of her age. I do think there's probably something in that she, now that she is no longer of reproductive age, she has power over him, as if like something about a woman's sexual, like reproductive viability makes her weak and makes her able to be targeted by him. I'm not sure the fact that she has power over him is really that much of a counterpoint to the like just overall kind of nasty misogynistic edge that these movies have. Not condemning them fully by any means, but you know, it's seems to be pretty incontrovertible.
Well, and I think that the lens is there. Hopefully people see these films. It's kind of like when you're talking about rape revenge films, right? You're not supposed to be rooting for the rapist. And if you are rooting for the rapist, well, that says something about you. But I think that's the point, is that it's there so that you can recognize that's evil. And we want to see it. Like if Coffin Joe emerged victorious, we'd be like, okay, wow. Not sure what's being said here.
But also keep in mind, again, going back to Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger was a pedophile.
Yep.
He was a killer of children, and he became an idolized.
Now your kid's dressing up like him.
Exactly. So it's you know, it's the same thing. However many years later, you have this anti-hero that had done very terrible, inexcusable things, but he became an anti-hero.
The idea of the iconic boogeyman, that we can hold these things at the same time, this incredible awfulness, and also, you know, like we were talking about before, kind of bringing it full circle, charm that he has. Yeah.
Jonathan?
Back when I first saw it, I probably was a bit more supportive of the Coffin Joe character, a bit more cheering him on a bit, and seeing it now, and I guess disliking him more because of, you know, that pretty you know, undeniable misogyny and whatnot. I actually felt that it made for a more well-rounded film. Like I enjoyed the comeuppance section more than I ever did in the past. Like I think when I first watched it, I kind of just switched off a bit in the last 15 minutes or so, because it's like, well, Coffin Joe's finished doing his thing now, and now it's just going to be you know, him getting punished. But I think I probably enjoyed the film more now, with a bit more of a moral perspective watching it, and it just made for a more well-rounded film for me. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, kind of going back to the Richard III comparison, I mean, Richard is terrible. Richard is an awful, awful character throughout, and yet he's the smiling villain. You know, he is the one that we are following, and actors want to play that role. And we also want to see Richard come to his just desserts. You know, like that is the journey that we're buying in for when we buy a ticket to see Richard III, or when we pop in Coffin Joe. We're looking to see that arc of the anti-hero who eventually, you know, meets justice. That final sequence, it's funny you talk about that, the ending, Jonathan, because I don't know what it is, like that kind of like black blood and grue that's on his face. It almost seems to like pull his face down so that his upper lip and chin are down here. It's a very like disconcerting image, and I'm not quite sure how he accomplished it, if it's just lighting or, you know, if there is some prosthetic going on. But I think the finale of At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul is really pretty impressive on a dramatic level. And I love the fact that the sequel, which we'll talk about now, This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, which came out 3 years later, it picks up right where that one left off.
I mean, I don't know what the availability of these films in Brazil was at the time. Does anybody know if he was influenced by Bava? Because especially by that final sequence, I get very heavy Black Sunday vibes.
I don't know. I mean, you get the feeling that he was somebody who was a legitimate filmmaker and a film fan. So it's entirely possible that Bava's work had reached South America, but I don't know. Hard to say.
At the end of the first film, one thing I really liked was you don't know if it's his corpse at first or whatever, but you see him lying there, and what he's seen is so awful that his eyes are bulging out of their sockets. And at the start of the next film, they say, boy, I hope he won't be blind from this,
Well, and there you go. Like we have, the good people of Sao Paulo are willing to nurse him back to health. It's like, well, he's seen the light, so we will, take him back into the fold. And of course, he is not repentant. He is immediately up to his old tricks.
It shows the flip side of who Coffin Joe is. You have this society that are friendly, they're helpful people, they're trying to do the right thing, even though the guy's obviously an uber prick. They're still going to help him because that's what you do. He obviously doesn't learn, and he continues his exploits to try to find his son, or to find a woman to have his son. In all three of these films, I don't think there's more of a tortured character than Coffin Joe. He never has any peace. So the rest of the city, yes, they live in fear of him, but they're still living their lives and enjoying life. They just try to avoid that guy. Coffin Joe's in agony the whole time. He's having delusions or being haunted by, these specters. It's interesting to watch, but it's not like, man, I wish I was Coffin Joe. Hell no, that guy hasn't had a night's sleep in years.
Yeah, he's a victim of his own ideology.
Exactly, yeah. So and I think he portrays that well. And in the second film, it's kind of it is a continuation of what he's trying to do, maybe a little bit more plotted and planned out. When he goes to hell and it turns color, that blew my mind.
Yep.
Because that, if I would have seen that when I was a child, that would have been forever etched. That is what hell is. Because he literally took almost like and I can't remember the artist's names, the painter. Is it Botch?
Yeah, Botch.
That's what that looked like. It looked with arms and limbs sticking out. People screaming, people getting mutilated, that in blazing color, that just went, holy crap.
It's an incredible sequence.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, because these kind of have almost a universal horror feel to them, they're so indelibly black and white. Like our minds are back in the 30s and 40s. And so the color suddenly reminds us, no, this is 1967. Color has been a thing for a long time. And I don't know if it was a economical choice to shoot in black and white. I suspect it was, but it works so well for these films. But then, as you said, John, when that color sequence kicks in, it completely changes it blows your head off. You're like, wait, you can't do that. You can't have a black and white movie for an hour and then give me a 10-minute color sequence, especially not that one that's filled with so much grotesquerie.
Yeah. And then go back to black and white.
Yeah, it's psychedelic. I heard a rumor that he found a reel of color film in a dumpster and decided to use it. I don't know how much truth there is to that.
I want that to be true.
Yeah, feels right.
It's interesting. I don't know if this was intentional, but it's an interesting counterpoint to the Wizard of Oz. How, when the color kicks in Wizard of Oz, it's to show this wondrous land of magic, and when the color kicks in a Coffin Joe film, it's to show actual hell and grotesquerie and torment, just to show it more. I don't know, more lucidly, I guess.
Yeah, this is the one motif that would be picked up again in the third one, but there's this spate of him kidnapping women. In this film, he kidnaps a whole, I think a half dozen women, kind of keeps them caged up, and then basically just murders them all in a pit of snakes.
He had to see who had the pardon the pun, the balls to stand up to the terror, because the one that that wasn't scared by the spiders.
Right.
He kept her and knew that she was the true one. Get rid of the rest of them.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that's what happened. Like, didn't he chose one that was fit for him, and then she watched with him while the other ones were being killed off.
But it also turns out that one of the women that ends up getting killed is pregnant. And that really sits heavy on his mind and soul, because he does consider children and childbirth to be a sacred thing.
Which just blows my mind that you can murder women left and right, but oh my God, I killed a child.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that sounds familiar. Huh. Where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting thing about it, is that, you know, this character is you know, he's this Nietzschean, what's the word, Übermensch or whatever, and he's so blasphemous and rails against God, and yet he is so distraught over the death of an unborn fetus. And there's almost this element of, like, Jose Marins himself, he can't quite bring all of the Catholic programming out of him, because he would have been raised Catholic, undeniably. And as blasphemous as it gets, he can't quite get that last bit out of him.
This is kind of contrary to all the stuff that we've been talking about, but some of the techniques that they use, there were people when I was in high school who took filmmaking classes, and they used some of these simple special effects, and they really are effective in here. Like, for instance, I'm thinking at the beginning of the second film, all the credits look like they've been scratched into the film. You know, they jump around and they're all animated. And in the first film, when the one ghost shows up, he's got like this strange aura all around him again that looks like the film has been scratched. And there's title animation in the beginning of the first one that kind of looks like Coffin Joe's clawed hands fluttering down the side. And just also the simple pre-Christopher Lee effect of, when you get mad, I'm sticking in the bloodshot contact lenses, and you better watch out.
Those great little effects, like there's one in the first film where we get kind of the whirling eyes transition. There's all sorts of great wipes and dissolves. It's a fun demonstration of his filmmaking skills, and then the idea that, like, this is what he wanted to do. The other thing that's kind of a new element in this film is the addition of nudity. Like, we actually have naked women in this film, which just feels like he's just pushing the envelope further.
I'm not sure whether it was a fear of censorship that stopped him the first time, or just not wanting to go there yet, or not thinking it was right for the story. But it does, like you said, something about 64 to 67, those 3 years, it was like a freak out. You know, all bets were off all of a sudden. We're in the late 60s now, you know. I have a question for the panel. What is exceptional about Coffin Joe? Why does he believe that and this is like, I think it's the flaw with eugenics as a whole. What is it that makes him think that he is genetically superior? Is it his ability to grow his fingernails?
Ego and delusion.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is it is that desire to be important, to be special, and to just simply decide. I mean, his whole thing is will. He has a great line where he says, "Nothing is stronger than my disbelief." That's a perfect example of who he is, that he has decided that this is his destiny. I don't know that there is any external force that, you know, dictates that to him. It is somebody, you know, again, like the narcissist that he is, he feels entitled. He feels that I am deserving. And that's because, as we've talked about, he's a broken guy on the inside. Like, this is a deeply damaged human being who is trying to compensate in any way he can find.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I also do think that he is maybe just reacting to his environment. Like, he's like really adamant about getting one over on the religious people.
Yeah.
You know, they're all idiots to them. He has it all figured out. They're all buffoons. You know, the crosses, these are just mere, whatever it is that he says. He's like, these are just like funny oddities. Like, I think he just, I guess it is narcissism, but I think he thinks that he has it all figured out, and everybody else is just a blind sheep.
For somebody who doesn't believe in the supernatural, he sure dresses an awful lot like the picture Baron Samedi from from voodoo movies and things. And I know they have Macumba that's down there. I don't know if he was going for that look or not, but
well, he also picks up a hunchback assistant for this second film as
yeah.
well. So
Bruno.
Bruno.
I love Bruno.
Bruno.
And I think that's another thing with the like, I really do think there's this thread of pointing out the ridiculousness of genetics. The only recurring character who's friendly to him, you know, who's in multiple films, is this guy who has a birth defect, you know, and he's very tender with him in Embodiment of Evil. He calls him old friend, and, you know, he's the first person he sees when he gets out of jail. And it's like, he really, you know, there's like an interesting love between these two. And this is the guy who's obsessed with genetic purity, but it's like only friend is, you know, someone who clearly lost, you know, like one of the genetic crapshoots.
Yep. I was kind of charmed. I hadn't seen Embodiment of Evil since 2008. Seeing Bruno show up again, I was like, "Aw, that's so cute." Let's shift forward to Embodiment of Evil. 2008, we were in full flower of the, you know, quote unquote torture porn movement, where the objective seemed to be, how can we shock? Marins, for all intents and purposes, came out of retirement and said, "Hold my beer." What were people's reactions when they finally caught up with Embodiment of Evil?
When I got the import DVD when it first came out, and me and some friends watched the first two films and then watched it, all three of them back to back. So it was literally a trilogy, all one movie. And the first thing I was just shocked and amazed at, as the transformation from 2 to the third one was seamless.
Yeah.
That they refilmed they extended the ending of the second one to bring in the third one. And I love the fact that it showed how powerful Coffin Joe was. Even though he was in prison for all these years, people still feared him. They were terrified of him. And I do think he, to your point, Aaron, he said, they're doing all this stuff, we're going to go even farther. And he also showed Brazil as not a nice place.
Right.
A lot of slums, a lot of crime. It puzzles me on the budget of this film, on some of the effects, such as the pig. I don't know if they paid to have a fake pig. It would have been cheaper to buy a pig, which means, yeah. And that to me, I'm like going, holy crap, he really is checking the boxes and going way over the top.
There's so much happening. You talked about the dedication of the actors in the previous two films. The performers who are, you know, being degraded in this, and part 3 is just like, oh my gosh, next level.
You know, I believe he got a lot of the performers prior to making the film. He went to S&M clubs and you know, performance artist troupes, so that he could film all these scenes like that. And I mean, you know, a lot of the violence in the movie is supposedly performed for real, because he got these performers who were willing to do that. So I mean, you know, he was dedicated to pushing some boundaries with this one.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this film, Embodiment of Evil, is that we see there's two forms of evil in this film. You know, Coffin Joe's brand of evil, but then there's also the corrupt government that is absolutely the enemy.
The cops.
Yeah, exactly. To see those two, like, on the one hand, you're not necessarily rooting for Coffin Joe, but you're certainly not rooting for anybody to catch him either.
It's interesting when they showed this on a double feature at Webster University. I'm sure that Aaron Obashan, from often a guest on this show, was there. And they showed it as double feature with This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse. And when they showed it, they had an individual, he's a local St. Louis person. His name is Ray Sharif Castile. And you may have seen, he's got lots of YouTube stuff about it. He has a huge monster mask and thing collection, but he dressed, and I'll be darned, he looked just like Coffin Joe. And he had two women with him who every now and then would utter phrases in Portuguese, you know, to supplement his soliloquies at the beginning of this thing. So it was pretty amazing to see that. That was a hell of an opening for this film.
That was Ray in the new sequences of Embodiment of Evil.
Oh,
he won the contest as a Coffin Joe impersonator. So when at the end of At Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, when he goes underwater, when he comes out of the water, that's Ray.
Well, he'd also done like a short film, right? The Strange Dates or something of Coffin Joe, where it's like, Coffin Joe trying to navigate online dating.
Yeah, because he did a whole thing online where he was going to Brazil to be in the film, and he looked just like him too.
Yeah,
he did.
So sorry, just skipping back from Embodiment of Evil, just a random bit of trivia that I learned having watched these movies for so long. Speaking of Coffin Joe impersonators, I didn't know that Jose Marins didn't use his own voice for Coffin Joe for the first two movies. So the whole time we've been listening to some guy who was good at doing a Marins impersonation, and he got hired to do the dub because I think Marins was a bit too drunk to do it himself or something like that. By the sounds of it.
The ADR is pretty bad, especially in the second one, but I had no idea that wasn't his voice. That's interesting.
Yeah, some other highlights from Embodiment of Evil, things that stood out.
The rat. We're going to talk about the rat.
Oh my goodness.
The cheese and the genitals and all that. That was so weird. Oh, good Lord.
Rough.
It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember the poor lady getting her scalp.
Right.
Oh, and it went over her eyes or something.
That's what he tells her that he's gonna keep her from having to look at this. It's too shocking for her eyes. And you think, he's gonna poke her eyes out, but no, he cuts her scalp and like pulls it up over her eyes like a blindfold. The creative mutilations and murders and things like that he comes up with. I remember reading the rat sequence, of course, put me in mind of American Psycho. But I remember reading American Psycho and thinking, you have to be willing as an artist to go in a really depraved place and come up with something that violates, kind of a moral compass for yourself. He's willing to do that. And he's also willing to sign his name to it as well. It's like, not only did I come up with this, here, I'll put it out there. Now it can live in your head rent free as well.
I also believe there's an urban legend around that as well. I'm not gonna, say he ripped it off from Bret Easton Ellis. The pig also definitely, if it's good enough for Luke Skywalker, it's good enough for unnamed woman number 17. That one was really, I think, John, you're absolutely right. I had that thought. I was like, there is no way that looks too good. Yep. And there's no way that they faked that. Yeah. That one's really, really memorable.
When they slice off the one woman's buttock and feed it to her.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Strange. And she was about it, she was into it.
Kind of going back to that idea of the consensuality, like he is a full-blown cult hero at this point. And so people are willing to, again, modern times, what we chose that guy to be our cult hero. Okay, cool. But women lining up to be part of his harem this time around, although there is still another sequence of them just kidnapping people off the dance floor and taking and throwing them in prison.
After watching many horror films in my lifetime, every now and then you'll go, oh, never saw that before. Man, my scorecard had been written on both sides, and I started a second one where you're going, oh, never saw that before. Oh, check that one. Oh, never saw Lady and a Pig. Okay, got that one. And it blew me away how excessive it was. But I think that was what he wanted to do. But on the same token, like he did in the first ones, he also showed real life horror with the police, with the poverty in Brazil. So this is the first one that I think that he was competing of the evil. Where in the first two, he's obviously the bad guy, no questions asked. But in here, after all this time being in prison, now the filmmaker, not that he was in prison, but the character Coffin Joe, but as a filmmaker, he's showing, I may be the bad guy, but look at my country. Look at what is going on here and who's really the bad guy. And I did like that twist of showing a duality of his character plus what really is the evil.
I think there's a case to be made that in the first film, that Coffin Joe, like that kind of all-out assault on society, that is, a stand-in for the government, that had taken over. I think there is a case to be made for that. And I think he's making that same kind of social commentary here again.
Yeah.
Just a little more blatant this time around. Like, you don't have to, he's not in place of the government.
Right.
He's actually fighting the government.
Yeah.
Probably he couldn't do it back then.
Right.
Yeah. And I also I just wanted to bring up, now that we're talking about the social commentary of the movie, I guess, I'm not so aware of what was happening in Brazil in that time. And, you watch movies like City of God or like Pixote, where it's like kids out on the street that are living on their own and all that. And in this movie, he's like, in all the Coffin Joe movies, he's very adamant about protecting kids and all that. Like, I wonder what, I don't know. I never really understood what the connection with that and these movies really are. Like,
why he's so protective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did anybody see a film that came out, a Brazilian film that came out right around the same time called Elite Squad? It was like a crime, it was like an action crime movie about these elite squad of Brazilian police, and they were essentially, fascist, brown shirts. They would black bag people. That was a big image where they would like put the black bag over somebody's head. And I noticed that shows up in Embodiment of Evil as well. They black bag one of the people. So I think that might be a little, I don't know how widespread that practice was at the time, but I know that it's sort of iconic of that, no holds barred extreme policing. So that was an image that I noticed when they go into the favela, and it seems like the police, is it the colonel, just has a love for just executing children for no reason, something that comes up again and again, like you said, in those other movies, those other Brazilian favela movies. So yeah, I can't imagine it was a time or, an easy or comfortable time or place to be a poor kid.
This is a filmmaker who is unafraid and is willing to make a statement and use his skills as a filmmaker to show us something we haven't seen before, but also put some real ideas behind it. It's not just shock for shock's sake. It feels like he has a message and is asking you, the audience, to kind of lean in and divine what that message is. Is this what he believes, or is this a satire of that belief? Let's circle back around. Some final thoughts on the trilogy, any memorable moments we haven't mentioned already, anything you'd like to toss out there?
It is funny that we were talking about, especially with the early films, there are little touches of things like the women are being abducted, to go into Coffin Joe's harem. Boy, those have a real kind of a giallo flavor to them, because you can sometimes see little black gloves coming and approaching and things. And we were talking about the impact of Universal films. Well, I know somewhere in there they've got some, in the first one, they've got some music cues from a Universal film. I don't know if it was library music or what it was, but it's definitely in there. And the thing I'll wrap up with is, when I was working at Edward Jones here in St. Louis, we had a young lady named Miss Fabian Milio. She came from Brazil, and of course, it's part of our natural outreach program. So, there's this guy in Brazil, his name is Jose Caixão, and, some people translate it Joseph the Grave, and some people call it Coffin Joe. And he says, he used to have these fingernails, and he made these moves. And as I'm talking to her, the eyes are just getting bigger and bigger. And it's like, now we're, as horror fans, we're nice guys, but we've also got a little bit of that imp of the perverse in us that wants to shock. And she's saying, that guy terrified me. He used to show his movies late at night in Brazil. And I said, I got them all here on DVD. You want to borrow them? No.
John, how about you?
I'm amazed that how well these films hold up. As I said in the beginning, they're highly crafted films. They're really well done. And I love the fact that 40 years later, he brings this character back, and it literally looks it feels like he never stopped. Like he created this boogeyman in the 60s. 40 years later, it's like it's a seamless transition to the new version. He's still the same character. He's still spouting off to whoever that's going to listen to him, still on that quest. And I think the Embodiment of Evil is still a well-made film. It does what it's trying to do. I think there's more of a obvious story of what he's trying to do.
Yeah, there's more plot for sure.
More plot and even more symbolism, subtext in there than the first ones. But again, watching the first two over, I'm just amazed at how well made they are.
Cullen?
I had a lot of fun revisiting these, and the thoughts I keep coming back to are we keep growing as fans and revisiting these movies, things that didn't bother us years ago are bothering us now and evoking new thoughts in us. And that's great. I love my horror community for how flexible we are and how teachable we remain. And I think these conversations are always helpful and provoke a lot of insight. And I also, the other thing I keep coming back to is eugenics, man. It's just, it's self-defeating. Everything about this, like, no matter how hard he tries, there is no consistency in his ideology. And I think it really, like, taken as a whole, they really just crack open and completely disprove this idea of genetic superiority. And yeah, he's a victim of his own ideology. And I think it's a cautionary tale and kind of reminds us of how a lot of that ideology, even though it's discredited, is still kind of baked into how we approach monstrosity as it's depicted on film. My final thought is stop giving sex to the bad guys.
How many times have we seen Dracula come back from the dead, resurrected? If you got to come back from the dead in the last film, albeit just for a short period of time, that's the way that we should all come back from the dead, very briefly.
Yeah.
John and I are always fans of saying you can never watch the same movie twice in the same movie. You can't step in the same river twice because the movies don't change, but we do. And I appreciate you, Cullen, mentioning that, because that's one of the great things about coming back around to art is seeing what it provokes, on this latest viewing or, experience. I realized I hadn't seen these movies in quite a long time, and I'm really glad that the anniversary came along because it gave me the excuse to break it out again and appreciate them anew. Jonathan, how about you? Last thoughts?
I guess last thoughts is, one thing that stands out to me about the whole trilogy is mostly Embodiment of Evil, to be honest, but this character and Jose Marins as a filmmaker, they both got to have their grand finale. Yeah. Like in a way that we don't really see very often. Like, he was a 72-year-old filmmaker at the time, and he got to give this big finish to his main character, and it's kind of glorious that we got to see something like that, which we don't often get. Like most horror icons, they just sort of drift away into bad, cheap imitations of what they once were. Whereas, Coffin Joe got to come back explosively and go out with a bang.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I love that his gravestone shattering. I'm like, yep, that's the way to go out.
But it does leave us with the tease, the possibility of son of Coffin Joe.
Oh yeah.
Exactly true.
Yeah. Enrico, bring us home. Final thoughts.
I guess my favorite kind of horror movies are horror movies made by filmmakers who are pissed off. Look at Wes Craven and whatever, the list goes on and on. You can just sort of see that this guy felt some type of way about the religious stuff that was happening and his upbringing, and who knows how Jose grew up. The guy is feeling a lot. He has a lot to say, and he's very angry about these things. And it just comes off in the art, and I love that. I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that in 2024. With now that our democracy is being threatened, it's just I hope I see more movies where these filmmakers are just pushing it to the edge to piss off some people, you know?
Yeah. Anger and passion. I mean, usually it's the artists who are leading the way. So, and also, you know, the fans. So thank you all for chiming in and lending your insights and sharing your experiences on this, as you said, Jonathan, a character that I think is still not very well known to the mainstream horror fan. So I hope anybody who's watching is intrigued enough to go and check these films out. Thank you all again for coming on. Looking forward to having you all again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.